Welcome to Mikes and Mayhem with Jenna Wren and Maddie Morrow.
I'm Jenna.
And I'm Maddie.
And we have mics, and as always, we are here to bring you mayhem.
The mayhemist of the mayhem. Is that a word? Mayhemist?
Yes. Well, it is now.
If Shakespeare can make up words, then so can we.
The USS Mayhemist.
Yes. It's
a tugboat.
Apparently, that's all we can afford.
We can't even afford a tugboat. Wow, you're dreaming.
So real, so true. So, in this character deep dive, we will be discussing Cherry from the anime Sk8 the Infinity. This is the Blossom half of the Matcha Blossom ship, which is the Joe and Cherry pairing.
Yes, this is the Joseph M. Blossom's last name comes from the Blossom and Cherry Blossom.
Yes.
Cherry's Christian name, Cherry Blossom. If you didn't get to watch our deep dive on Joe, be sure to check that out. It's not as long as our Reki and Longa deep dive, so you'll save yourself a little time. But you should watch our Reki and Longa deep dive too. It's pretty great. If you happen to stumble upon us, welcome. We hope you enjoy and you stay along for our crazy ride. And if you haven't seen Sk8 the Infinity, please save this video and come back to watch once you have. If you are a Sk8 fan, buckle up because we're about to deep dive into Cherry's character.
Yes. And there is a lot to be said about Cherry, just like there was a lot to be said about Joe. Again, because we get a look at Cherry, whose name is actually Kaoru. Do not ask me how to pronounce his last name, because I cannot. All I know is that it starts with like Sakura, which is pink. I can't pronounce it.
If I had it in front of me, I could probably sound it out because, I'm pretty sure it's phonetical, but it's a long one.
It is. And I'm pretty sure it means cherry blossom. Like, I'm pretty sure that's what his last name means.
Well, Sakura, they're cherry blossoms, so that
it's pink.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is my cherry blossom sweater. This is actually inspired by Cherry himself, and it is from Steady Hands.
We are not sponsored.
We're not sponsored. I just wanted to give a little shout out because look at how cute it is, and it's Cherry.
It's very cute. It's adorable.
But if you want to sponsor us,
yes, please. Yeah. So Cherry, has the rich history and lore, much like Joe, because we get to see his high school years, and then we get a look into his like professional life as well as his life on the track.
Yeah, I mean, should we start with kind of like a little bit of a quick overview of Cherry for just a base jumping off point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Cherry is beautiful. That's when I think of Cherry, I think of how pretty he is. He's got beautiful, long, flowing pink hair. As a teen, he is one of the founders of S, along with Joe and Adam. They met as teens, which we will get into. We've talked about that in Joe's deep dive as well. 3 of them went on to be the founders of S, like I just said. Falling out happened. Joe and Cherry are now the 2 that still have a relationship in adulthood. And Cherry's pretty much one of the mentors of the younger crew. And he also professionally is a flourishing calligrapher, which I always think is a very interesting job that they gave him.
Yeah, and he makes like stacks on stacks of cash, like in the in the intro, like, when Reki is talking about, where do people find their happiness? Is it in relationships? Is it, getting good grades? Is it in money? They show Cherry getting this like Mondo briefcase, just like full of cash. Like, it's so much money. So it is no wonder that like he wears traditional Japanese clothing and he has the ability to maintain his AI skateboard. So he is well to do, but it's pretty great to see him and Joe both be successful in very different ways. And those 2 met as children. Like, they've known each other since like kindergarten. So we don't see that like in Skate. We don't have their childhood, but we do get like their high school years, and so like these three founders of S have like very flourishing lives, or at least it looks that way. And Cherry Cherry's job, I feel like, is very different from the way he skates. So like his professional life is very different from who he is at S.
Yeah, it's funny, I'm thinking about the suitcase full of cash, and I don't think that's ever mentioned ever again. It's just shown, like, who paid him that way? Who was like,
I don't
"Here's a
know.
big briefcase full of wads and stacks on stacks of cash."
It's so much money. It's so much.
It's yeah, he's loaded, and he doesn't shy away from it, and he's also extremely revered in his career, not just his career, but his public persona. Like, he's kind of a local celebrity. I mean, he not kind of, he is a local celebrity. The women are all fawning over him in his day job, "Oh, it's the calligrapher, it's Kaoru," and everyone, like, loves him, and then the same in his skate life, all the women again are fawning, "Oh my gosh, look, it's Cherry," which is so funny because he, like, shows no interests in it.
None. Not even a little bit. And
Don't
it's
think he's ever
crazy.
even looked at a woman in the show.
He's the one where if you did that game like Name a Woman, like he would not be able to Cherry would not be able to name a woman. Maybe his
You're like,
mother, but he would not be able to name a woman. Like
yeah, he literally, I think, does not ever interact with or even look at a woman at all in the series, like Shadow does. Shadow's got his, like, little girlfriend, you know, Joe is trying to pick up women all the time, Reki and Longa have moms, and Cherry is never once seen with a woman. Even Adam is. Oh,
Yep.
goodness.
Yeah, it's funny because like, you know, in our last video we took a look at Joe and the way that his character design is and how he's, the macho man, the super like buff, himbo daddy character, right? But he's actually like super sweet and, you know, he's like the parental figure, But Cherry is designed to be more feminine. And we did touch on this too with, in our other deep dive. But Cherry has the long, beautiful hair. He's more, of the feminine of the two of them.
He has
But
beautiful
he
ankles,
he does have beautiful ankles and calves, apparently, because that's what
lovely
Joe fawns
legs.
over. Yeah, very
Yes.
beautiful legs. But he is not a parental figure. He is not like the mom. He's, it's that gender norm like just gets thrown out the window, right? Like he is not he might look, more feminine, but he does not act that way at all.
Right, and, it reminds me of stuff I've seen on social media where it will contrast Cherry in a lot of times depict the way he's depicted in fanfics versus how he actually is in canon, and a lot of times, like, you see him as, like, like, I'm talking fanfics, like, oh, he's more of, like, the I guess you could say emotional, right? Like, sometimes you see him, like,
Mhm.
he's more, like, emotional, but in canon, he is tough as nails. He really doesn't display soft emotions. It's a lot of fire from him, it's a lot of hard edges, there's anger, he is, in his way, loving, but it's not soft. He is not at all a soft character, like, where you have Joe, who is extremely nurturing and loving and soft. Cherry is not even a little bit like that.
No, no, he's not. And that's why I was saying, like, it's interesting that they gave him a very creative job to be able to like draw and write like these beautiful fluid designs when that's not his personality. You know, he skates robotic. Joe calls him out all the time because he uses, you know, a computer in his AI Carla, you know, to help, you know, him get the exact angles and exactly how fast he needs to be going and all this stuff. And it's very calculated. Whereas, like, you know, writing and calligraphy, I will say I tried to do calligraphy because I can't draw, so I thought maybe I could like write fancy lettering. It's not easy, and
No, it's art.
you have to be willing to like flow with the different letters, and it's even more so in Japanese because they have the very, you know, distinct characters, you know. And so for Cherry to be such a different person in his profession, you know, his profession's a little softer, but that doesn't mean he is, you know?
No, I would love to see how he even got into that profession because it's so off-brand for him. It's not it's like I could almost see him more in Joe's profession than a calligrapher. It's like even I mean, not that Joe works a job that's extremely robotic, but it's just not as what's the word I'm looking for? Not as like I guess creative. Like it's not that Cherry's not creative, he's just not flexible. He's not very flexible at all. And
Mhm.
you know, it's really interesting to me that he is the one person at S who wears a mask. You know, he wears the mask to cover his face. I mean, I'm assuming it's to hide his identity because he doesn't want anyone to know that he's the famous calligrapher. But at S, he is himself. Like that is the Cherry that we know. Like that is who he is. He's not the person that you see at his day job. Like, so to me, it's interesting because the mask is really his day job. That's not who he is. And when he's wearing the mask at S, he's himself.
Yeah, and that is a complete contrast to Adam. Well, not really, because Adam has to wear a mask, right? He wears his mask at S because he's a politician, and so obviously he doesn't want to disgrace that. And we'll get into Adam completely another time. But Adam is also wearing that mask. And so if you walk down the street and saw, you know, I know Sk8 Shindo, you wouldn't know that that was Adam. Same with Cherry, you know, like despite the long pink hair, like I feel like that's more for the viewers to know who the main characters are in this show, you know what I mean? Like they don't think about, you know, that sort of a thing. Like I don't think
Right.
the in-world characters don't don't think about it the way we do. It's more for us to visually like, okay, yeah, like the main character has bright red hair, blue hair, pink hair, green hair, you know?
Or they're not gonna tie his hair, like they're not gonna put his hair in a hat. So like you wouldn't be able to see that this is Cherry. You need to see it's him.
Mhm. Yeah. And so you see Cherry on the street, but it's funny because Reki knows him, but I'm wondering if that's because Longa recognized him. Because Longa had the job interview at Cherry's calligraphy shop in the beginning, and then when he sees Cherry at S, he's like, I just saw you earlier, you know, and so I'm pretty sure he told Reki, right? If Reki didn't already know, you know, but it's very different from like Joe, where Joe looks exactly the same in, you know, he doesn't really hide anything. If anything, he like sheds things, right? He just takes his shirt off when he goes to S and then puts it
He doesn't
back on
change
in
his
real life.
name. He doesn't have a
No,
code name, nothing.
no, no. So, you know, Cherry like is very secretive about who he is. He takes the rule of we don't talk about S outside of S very seriously.
It was his rule for sure. He was the one who insisted that they do that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, because Joe talks about it with the kids at the rest like at a restaurant. He like hears them talking about it and doesn't tell them to stop. But when Reki goes to Cherry and is like, he wants him to help Longa not skate against Adam, and he runs through the crowd, Cherry, Cherry. And Cherry's like, oh, this poor child. Whack, like, whacks him with a fan and is like, don't you dare call me that. Like, that is not my name outside of S, you terrible, miserable child. Like,
I'm gonna throw you in a river. Like, he's not nice to him.
no, he's not. No.
But it's interesting that you said you wonder if Longa was the one who tell Reki, and the assumption that I have is yes, because, when the show starts, Reki has been part of S for an indeterminate amount of time. Like, he's been skating in S for a while. So, like, if he had known who Cherry was, you would have like, I think we would have seen that earlier. Like, it was more of a reveal to Reki, kind of. So it makes me think, yeah, he's been skating this time and didn't realize Cherry lives among us.
That's true. That's true. That makes sense. Yeah. So, with Cherry, we also see his like high school years. He was the delinquent. Cherry was the one with long unkempt hair. He's the one with piercings, right? Like, he was the punk kid in contrast to Joe's like preppy look, you
Even
know.
Adam was more put together than Cherry. Like, Cherry is clearly the bad one. Like, he's the he's the one who definitely got Joe in trouble all the time, and Joe was like, "I don't know if we should be doing this, Cherry." Like, he's definitely not like you would expect. Like, if I had watched the show without flashbacks, and then they were like, "Wow, what would you think that a young Cherry would look like?" It would not be what we actually got. It would not be this punk, delinquent, like, bad boy, I guess you could call him.
Yeah, I mean, they all kind of, I mean, they were all delinquents because that's like the stereotype that gets slapped onto skateboarders, especially like when we see them, running through the school and getting chased by, security and stuff, because you're not supposed to be skating in these areas, and they know that, like, they know they're breaking these rules. But yeah, like, I completely agree. If you were to hold up a photo of present timeline Cherry in his, cover up, the kimonos and his, parasol, so that way he doesn't like, get his, the sun on his skin, I would not have pinpointed him as the one with piercings. And then it begs the question, like, does he still have the holes for those piercings, like, as an adult? Because he doesn't wear them at S, and you wouldn't be able, he pulls his mask down at a couple of points at S.
But no, but he's a lip ring too, so you don't see it, but we
Right.
should.
That's that's what I'm saying. Like, he pulls his mask down and there's nothing there. So it's like, does he just not put those piercings in as an adult? Did those holes close? Because I know your lip takes a really long time to close up. Like, it's not like your ear holes that you don't put an earring in for 2 months and the skin grows back, Like, it takes a really long time. So it's very interesting to like think about, like, does he still have those piercings or not?
Yeah, I mean, he is the one who makes the most dramatic shift from adolescence to adulthood. So we don't know exactly when that happens, when he goes from this rebellious punk life to the quote unquote put together business calligrapher fancy man that we see now. So, you can assume that maybe at like some point that shift happened. I mean, I like to think it was after Adam left. Once Adam left, like, his world took a different trajectory. So, maybe that's when things kind of he cleaned up his act, if you will. But yeah, something clearly happened to make him go from A to B, because he is not even a little bit like he was as far as looks go. He's not like that anymore. And, same with Joe in that he was the scrawny preppy kid and now he's this big buff dude bro, but he's still, I mean, he didn't change that much besides his actual body. Like his like buffness, but Cherry like changed his whole persona and his look.
Yeah, he changed it, but only in like real life. Like that's like where it's different. And so like I know you mentioned this earlier, but which Cherry is actually wearing the mask? You know, like is he putting on a front in his professional life because he knows that if he's true to the things he actually wants that it could like get him in trouble, you know? And then it's like, well, where did that fear come from if that's the case? You know, was it when Adam left and they realized that they, you know, were losing people because of what they wanted to do with S and things like that? But, you know, Cherry is holding on for 7 years this grudge against Adam, and I always assume that the grudge was him leaving without like, well, he didn't like not say goodbye. He says in the flashback like I'm leaving, I'm going to America. Like we know that that's what happened. So it's like, okay, was the grudge because he left, or was the grudge because he saw Adam hurting people and never like understood why Adam did those things? And then Adam left because they like, you know, saw him hurting all these people and he left. But what's interesting is Adam let Cherry and Joe see him before he left. So in that flashback, Adam's hood comes off and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like your hood. What are you going to do?" And he's like, "You're my friends. Like I trust you, you know, why wouldn't I show you who I am?" And then he leaves. So is Cherry upset because he got a glimpse of the real Adam and then nothing? And then when Adam comes back, he's this like crazy is not the right word. I keep wanting to
He's
say that, but that's
manic.
so manic. Like he's just yearning for this someone to be his equal that he doesn't even recognize him.
Yeah, I took it to mean, like, the grudge was when Adam came back and started skating with S again, that he was extremely dangerous, but that doesn't actually track now that I think about it because, like you said, it's been a grudge for 7 years, unless Adam's been back for 7 years because he left when they were, like, 16, right? They were, like, 16, and so that would have been 10 years, so figure, if he was gone for a few years and came back, that could be the 7 years we're talking about, so I don't know, they never really go into exactly why, Cherry has this intense grudge, which, leads to a lot of speculation in the fandom that it was a complete toxic ex situation, which it is structured like a really, really bad breakup, like that Adam and Cherry were like a first love, and like it's even hinted, I would say, at with the way Cherry looks at Adam and then the way Adam reacts to Cherry, like when Cherry falls and he holds him by the back of the waist, like it's very intimate. It's very couple-y. It's so
Mhm.
it kind of always reminded me of this is a first high school love, and then Cherry is bitter because it's a bad breakup and, like, Adam leaves, he's gone. So that's always kinda like how I looked at it, that, like, "Oh my god, my toxic ex is back, but, oh, he broke my heart," kinda thing. That's always how I looked at it.
Yeah, and that's fair too, you know, and it like plays into Cherry's personality type. I'm going to put this disclaimer in every single deep dive we do because all of these personality type things are open to interpretation and you know, it doesn't necessarily define you, but it is very interesting that, you know, he is an ISTJ, which is more introverted, and we see that he's more like closed off. He's not the one to like be all out. He's not the loud, character, that's more Joe and Reki are the loud ones, where you have Cherry and Longa being the more reserved ones. But Cherry is also like a very judgmental person. Like he clocked Longa as a snowboarder. And it's funny because you think like, oh, Cherry, like you just are a know-it-all, but he like knew. He just was like, I can tell by the way he skates, is it's very clear to me that this is what he does, because he like watched him and judged him and was like, snowboarder, obviously. And Reki's like, well, obvious. What do you mean obvious? Like,
Well, Cherry's very that makes me think, he's very learned. He's very
mhm.
educated on his
Yeah.
own. It's not obviously just like he went to college, he's book smart. He has done his research in things related to, skateboarding because maybe that I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about skateboarding and snowboarding, but I would think that as a founder of maybe like he like looked into techniques and stuff. So basically it's just he's an extremely learned person.
Mhm. Yeah, and his personality type is also labeled the logistician. That's quite the word. So everything he thinks about and does is like calculated and, logical, which is funny being a delinquent skateboarder. In high school, we saw him using like regular skateboards and he was falling down like a normal, teenager on a skateboard. And so part of me thinks that like when he grew up and Adam left and he had this like grudge of, oh, Adam left me behind because I wasn't good enough for him. And holding on to that grudge, he made Carla. But of course, no, because he had Carla when Joe and Cherry went on trips. And so I don't know if that was high school or after, but maybe he started skateboarding exclusively with Carla once Adam was out of the picture. So that way he could be more calculated and more, like methodical about skating. So he could go faster, you know, take these corners the way Adam did. But because he didn't have the desire to like the way Adam skates is very different from how everyone else in the show skates. And it's a lot more dangerous. And I don't think Cherry wanted to skate that way because it's terrifying and dangerous. And so with Carla, he could go in that direction, but have something tell him, you need to slow down here, you need to speed up here, instead of trying to figure all of that out fluidly.
Right, and Carla also he uses Carla for analysis. So he doesn't just use it necessarily for his own skating, but he uses it to analyze Joe. Like you see him using it to clock what Joe is doing and to analyze the corners and to look at the way patterns flow in other skaters. So it's really an all-around tool for him to not only, I guess you could say, improve his skating, but to figure out what's going on around him with his opponents and his fellow skaters. So he's very much reliant on that. And Joe does call him out for it. He's like, your skating has no flexibility. Your skating is too robotic, or I don't remember exactly the term he uses to basically tell Cherry, "Hey man, you take no risks. You take 0 risks. Everything is so to the centimeter." And it's important because Joe does say like skating is not about that. It's about the creativity and the flexibility and the risks that you take because skaters are insane and take crazy risks.
Yeah, and you know, you bring that up with Cherry using Carla to analyze his opponents, and that's very different from like the way Reki watches people skate. Like Reki watches people skate and then like can create a whole board for them. Like he watches people skate and he's like, "Oh, you need this or you should do this." Whereas Cherry uses it to better himself and to like make fun of Joe. whereas Reki, like, watches people skate and wants to help them improve. Like with Longa, obviously, he made that board because he watched the way Longa skated and was like, "Oh, you're having issues here. Well, let me adjust this for you. Oh, you're having issues here. Well, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z." Whereas Carla is for the betterment of the way Cherry skates and the way Cherry does things, in general.
Right, and that also I know, like, you kind of tied that all into his personality type, but it also goes along with his astrology type, which we've been hitting on in each, deep dive here. He is a fire sign, which I love because he is fiery, he's feisty, he's passionate. He really is all these things that come along with the description of being a fire sign. Specifically, he's an Aries. March 27th is his birthday. So if you are born on March 27th, you share a birthday with the lovely Cherry. Interesting too is that Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and Cherry is the oldest one out of all of them. Out of his little trio, he's the oldest one, I believe. Joe is the youngest because Joe is a summer baby. So Joe is the baby of their little group. So I think that's kind of a cute little nod that he's the first sign of the zodiac, and he's the oldest of all of them actually.
Mhm.
And when it comes to Aries, he really does check a lot of the boxes, whereas there were a lot of points in his personality trait that don't fit him, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit too, because we have actually a lot to say about Cherry, and we haven't even gotten into the matcha blossom part of things. So for Aries, their strengths are they're courageous, determined, confident, enthusiastic, optimistic, honest, and passionate. I would say some of those hit Cherry. Again, like, this is how it is with zodiacs for the most part. Some things fit you, some things don't, but, like, I don't necessarily think he's honest because, like we said, he quite literally wears a mask and figuratively wears a mask, so we don't know, like, where the real Cherry lies. Personally, I think the real Cherry that we get glimpses of are when he's with Joe in the quiet moments. And, we're gonna jump into that a little bit because I have a lot to say about that, and I'm sure Maddie does too. The weaknesses actually do pretty much hit Cherry to a T. Aries are moody and short-tempered and impulsive and aggressive.
Yep.
It's like, that is Cherry. He is so moody and he's so aggressive.
He really is, and he's not shy about it either. Like, he is a constantly, like, name calling Joe. He's, hitting Reki when Reki is calling him Cherry. Thankfully, he, like, whacks him with his fan, like, away from the crowd of people. So he's not, like, actively, like, whacking a 17-year-old in public.
Doesn't he get him by the collar too? He has him, like, up by the collar.
Yeah, well, he excuses himself. He's like, "This child is clearly dehydrated. I'm just gonna go get him a sip of water." And then he grabs him, yeah, by, like, this part of his hoodie and just holds him like, "What's the first rule of S?"
He's such a brat. I love him so much. Interesting too, going back to Aries, they are continuously looking for ways to express themselves, which ties into his job, I suppose, because, like, why else would he get into a job that is something that's extremely creative when we don't necessarily see him exhibit those traits in the majority of his life? But as Aries also seeks speed and competition, striving to be the first in everything from work to social gatherings. And that is true in S, but also in his relationship with Joe. They are always he's always trying to one up Joe. And Joe's
Always.
not really trying to one up him.
No, no, because Joe is usually like, "Really? Like, that's not how I remember it. Like, this is the way that it actually was." And Cherry's like, "No, no, no, you are clearly wrong. I am always right."
Yeah, he
Always,
cannot win.
in everything.
Yeah, Joe cannot win, like, Cherry
Mm-mm.
and it's funny because it seems like Joe mostly just lets it go, like, "Alright," like, but Cherry's like, "No, he will fight Joe tooth and nail to be correct."
Mhm. Yeah, 100%.
They're so silly, but with Aries, challenges arise when they become impatient and they vent their anger towards others. This is probably one of my favorite things that I found when doing my research for this because that harkens to the grudge again against Adam. He is basically venting his anger towards Adam, although, like, to be fair, Adam deserves it, but it's clearly laser focused on this target for Cherry, and he has this, like, burning desire for episodes to beef with Adam, and then when, like, the tournament comes down, he's so, so, so determined to be the one to be in the bracket with Adam. He's gonna be the one to do it, even though, Joe does want to go up against Adam too. It's not as pressing for it's not as much of a all-consuming rage like it is for Cherry.
Right. He mentions that he wants to, or Joe mentions that he wants to beef Adam, and Cherry's like, I said it first. Like, if you want to do it, get behind me, like, get in the back of the line, like, because I'm going to do it first. And then they want to beef with Adam at the same time while he's going to beef with Reki. And Adam's like, no, no, and even Reki's like, no, like, this is my turn to race Adam. And we talked about that a little bit when we talked about Reki. But Cherry, yeah, like, he has that burning desire to win. And then we even see, like, Adam, like, is so uninterested in racing Cherry. So when he pulls his name out of the hat to beef against him, he's like, "Guess I'm beefing with you," and so,
That's
like,
so messed up. That's such a
it's
slap in the face.
it is, and you see Cherry reacts that way. He's like, "Excuse me? Like, I am clearly a worthy opponent for you," and I think that's part of the grudge. When Adam was a teenager, he was hurting so many people in this process of searching for his Eve that, you know, thankfully, we don't see Cherry getting hurt in the flashbacks, but I have a feeling he did, and even if it wasn't physically, like, with that toxic X-like atmosphere between the two of them, like, chances are good it was more of, like, emotional and, like, verbal, like, things that Adam would take out on Cherry, which is why Cherry, was still so angry with him because Adam had a really terrible life. Like, his childhood was awful, but I'm getting off track here. We're talking about Cherry.
No,
But,
but
like,
they do all 3 of them, Joe, Cherry, and Adam. It's kinda hard to talk about one without all 3 of them, or at least especially Joe and Cherry, but, Adam too, like because they all impacted
mhm,
each other, and I think
yeah,
a part that I think we really should dive into that's important is the actual beef between Joe and not Joe, the actual beef between Adam and Cherry, because that is a really, really significant thing for Cherry's character. I feel like he would have won or would have done better. Like Adam actively gets off his board to do that insane move where he like just wails Cherry in the face with his board. And I always felt like it was a last ditch effort to end the race, but also he wanted to hurt Cherry. Like he wanted
mhm.
to take him out. Like they're beefing in more ways than one, like verbally and everything, but when he jumps off that board and swings it at Cherry, like that to me is one of the most I mean, forgive me for this pun, but striking moments of the entire series for me. It's so shocking and violent and just oh my god, it hurts me.
Well, yeah, and it's, one of the things that we learn quickly about S from the very first episode of Skate the Infinity is anything goes. The only rule is not to talk about it outside of the course. But anything goes, because we see Shadow throwing fireworks and pushing people off their boards, and then during the tournament, like, Longa's skating against, like, 6 people at once who are, like, trying to beat him up while also on the skateboard, like, anything goes. And Adam has that love hug thing that, like, throws people off their boards, and so, like, it while, yes, it's unexpected because you assume that Adam's gonna do the love hug thing that's been, like, built up that he does to Reki, that has been, like, this rumored move that he can skate uphill, and, like, so as Adam is turning to do it, you're like, "Oh, okay," and even Cherry is, like, ready for it. He's like, "I know exactly what he's gonna do," which is why Adam did what he did, because Adam knows Cherry, like, they went to school together, they had a close relationship, toxic or not, like, he knows Cherry and Cherry knows him. So Adam knew that Cherry would expect this famous move of his. So of course he was going to change it up and completely, shock everyone. Mm, But ultimately, Adam didn't want to skate against anyone but Longa. This was just his way of literally taking out the competition because there are no rules. And so in order for him to get to the end game, he had to he had to, which sucks because it's so awful to watch, and ultimately leads to Cherry's mask ripping, which I think is quite symbolic. We have a lot of those moments in the show where masks are breaking, ripping, coming off, to kind of show the deeper emotions of what they're feeling. I mean, obviously, Cherry's been rattled. He probably has a concussion and a few broken bones, and we see him in a wheelchair after this race, you know? But that mask ripping is huge because it's like, okay, was this beef between Cherry and Adam and the way it ended, that final, like, rip of the band-aid to see just how angry Cherry has been all of these years.
Right, and, you see him when he's taken down and laying on the ground, he's struggling to keep his eyes open, he's, like, very, very much in pain and injured, like, I was like when I first watched the show, I was like, "Oh my god," like, Adam woulda killed him, and I feel like it came from a deeper place than just the practicality of it, like you mentioned. Obviously, he was gonna do something, like, off the rails anyway because, like you said, he's trying to get to Laga, but because it's Cherry, I feel like that heightened things and that, like, he kind of planned almost, like, he had in the back of his head, like, "Okay, if I go against Cherry, this is what's gonna happen." He had to take him out, but, like, it was so violent and so excessive that it's, like, personal. It's a personal thing to me, and, Cherry is, like, trying to look up at him, and with the ripped mask, he, like, is still struggling, but importantly, who is the one who comes in and literally picks him up? Who is the one that comes in and takes him away from the situation and cares for him and is takes him away from Adam to heal and to get help? It's Joe.
Mhm.
And that's a super, super important and symbolic choice more than, "Oh, it's just like his friend Joe coming in to help." It's that whole moment is intense because Joe's watching him, watching him, watching Cherry on the screen, and he doesn't even really care about Adam. He's watching Cherry, and he's even like, "Kaoru," like that really ridiculous. I'll never get over that, but that's a whole other thing. "Kaoru," but
Kaoru.
It's like it's so ridiculous, but
It's so
anyway,
romantic.
it's so but like Cherry does the same thing. He's like, "Kojiro," like, "Really? Come on." Anyway, it's super symbolic to have Joe rush in as like, immediately and be
Mhm.
the one to save him?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and insider information, I have interviewed Kyle Phillips a few times, and Kyle Phillips is the English director for Sk8 the Infinity English dub, and they wanted Joe to say, "Babe," in that moment instead of "Hey," but they opted for not doing that because technically Joe and Cherry are not canon, but they're canon enough. But they thought it would have been a little too much to go
A
that
little too on
route.
the nose.
A little, yeah, a little too much. And
So
so somewhere
it's like
on a
their implied canon.
yes, so like on a computer somewhere, there's a recording of Joe saying babe instead of hey or cherry or whatever he says in that moment. So yeah, it's very important that Joe goes to him and, cares for him. And it's fascinating because I will say this in every deep dive we do of Skate the Infinity, they don't do anything on accident in this show. And so when you look at the color scheme of Cherry and Joe, like pink and green are opposites on the color wheel, they go together. Like while Joe and Cherry are fighting, like it's just an act, like they're just ridiculous people. But in those quiet moments, like they're very sweet. And like, Joe is like, we're not alone, are we, Karu? Like it's the two of us. Like we have each other, and Adam doesn't have anyone right now. And then you look at pink and blue, and like, yeah, they kind of go together, but culturally speaking, pink and blue are always at odds because pink is it's a gendered thing, like not anymore so much, but for a long time, right? Pink was always associated with the feminine and blue was always associated with the masculine, right? And so with Adam being the blue and Cherry being the pink, like we knew that those two were never going to go together because they've been at odds for such a long time. And then we see Cherry get whacked by Adam, and you're like, oh, yeah, clearly, like these two were never meant to be on that same level, but Joe and Cherry are.
Right, and now this brings us to the matcha blossom part of the discussion, and this is like so we really, I think, didn't really wanna go really heavy into it when we did Joe's deep dive because we still had Cherry to get to, and, honestly, if we had done the 2 at the same time, it would have been like a 2.5-hour episode. So but now that we're at Cherry, we really can dive into Match Blossom. And,
Mhm.
obviously, like you said, pink and green are complementary colors. Joe and Cherry look like they're at odds, but they're really not. It's a front. It's quote unquote mask, and it mostly comes from Cherry's side. It's mostly Cherry being the one to instigate to, cause these little rifts. And, this isn't necessarily just us being like, we're reading into the subtext. Like this is legitimately what is put in front of us and what even like directors and such creators feel that Joe and Cherry are more than just implied, if you will,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, with Skate the Infinity, I feel like there really isn't subtext. Like I feel like there is for the sake of anime censorship in a way, because they can only get away with so much if it's not explicitly labeled a BL. But this one, as far as sports anime goes, aside from like Yuri on Ice, which was clearly gay, like that's the whole story, right? Is their relationship. But like with Skate the Infinity, like it's borderline. I mean, not even borderline. It's it's a BL masquerading as a sports anime. BL means boys love. I realize that I didn't. I just assume everyone knows what that means, but BL is boys love. It's a whole genre of, anime and manga and stuff. With Joe and Cherry, like it's not a brotherly relationship. It's not just we're just friends. Like there's clearly so much going on with the two of them. It's not again, it's not there's no subtext here. Like it's clear. And they are the parallel for Reki and Longa, throughout the series.
Yeah, I always say that even if you want to make the analysis that Reki and Longa are just friends, which I will never make that analysis, but if you want to, I mean, I suppose it's a little easier to argue that when there is literally no hetero explanation for Joe and Cherry. Like, they, to me, are like, a pair. They are already, like, established
Mhm.
couple. You know, you even have the moment where in what was it? It's like episode like 3 or something. It's really early on. I'm sure you know the exact number. But when Cherry's demonstrating what the love hug really is, you know, he uses Joe as his target and turns his skateboard around and he like zips like
Yep.
right up to Joe and Joe gets all blushy and he's like, "You're too close." Like, and you have Joe all these, like, quote, unquote, nicknames. He calls him princess. He's like, "Whatever you want." It's, like, very much it's an established relationship to me, and he calls him, like doesn't he call him, like, beautiful or something? He calls him something like that.
He calls him Precious. He says Precious
Precious.
doesn't wanna get a tan, Princess this. He calls him cute.
Princess.
Yeah, Princess. He says,
So
"You're
cute.
cute, but I'm not budging." Yeah, and you know, the name so Cherry calls Joe things like gorilla, buffoon, like, he uses, like, really mean, aggressive names for Joe, but Joe turns right around, and I'm pretty sure it's meant to be an insult because he looks more feminine, but honestly, like, eh, those pet names are not really something that, like, dude bros give their dude bro friends, like, it's
Yeah, if I were, like, hanging out with my guy friends and 2 of them were like, "Hey, precious. Hey, princess. You look cute." I'd be like, "Sounds a little sus to me."
little bit.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like, I feel like Cherry's love language is bullying.
Is it insulting Joe? Yeah, 100%, because, like, even in their softer moments, Cherry is not the one being soft, it's Joe, you know, like, yeah, Cherry is, like, not screaming at Joe about something, like, at the hot springs when they get there first and they're talking, like, Cherry is still, you know, bullying Joe somehow, but he's not, like, yelling it, you know? But so, like, yeah, they have their quiet moments, but Cherry is still aggressive. But I do think you're right. I do think that that's his love language is being mean, and that's just how he is.
Right, and like you said, they've been friends since they were children, so it's not like this is anything unexpected on Joe's part, like, this is just how Cherry
Mhm.
is. But the moments, like you said, these, like, quiet moments are always when no one else is around, like, that's when you see the real Cherry and Joe. It's not they're never when they are alone on screen, it's never loud, it's never, you know, yelling, even though there might be, like you said, a little bit of light bullying on Cherry's part, but it's never aggressive. Well, like,
It's
I'm not
not
talking
loud
about the
aggressive.
yeah, I'm not talking about, like, the jabs at Joe, but I'm talking about,
Mhm.
like, it's not charged, it's always, like, a relationship, Cherry quite literally trusts Joe with his life. You know, you see when he gets out of the hospital, he's not home. Like, you never ever see Cherry or Joe at home. Has him at the restaurant. The restaurant's closed. They're alone together, and obviously Cherry is comfortable enough to be there alone and asleep in Joe's care. It's so intimate. Like, these moments between them are so intimate and so like, really touching.
Mhm. It's vulnerability. It's, you know, Cherry wears the mask at S, right? But he's very vulnerable with Joe. You know, he shows up in his AI wheelchair, you know, and Joe's like, "You were just in the hospital. Like, why are you here?" You know, and Cherry like brushes it off. He's like, "I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." But really, Cherry was probably uncomfortable at the hospital and went to the place where he is the most comfortable, which was with Joe. and Joe was probably in the process of closing up his restaurant. So that's where Cherry went. Cherry could have gone home. He could have been like, I'm going to discharge myself from the hospital and just go home. And he didn't. He went straight to Joe and demanded wine, which he probably should not have. I'm thankful that the wine bottle was empty when Cherry tried to pour it, because I don't think he should have had alcohol on painkillers. Like, I'm pretty sure he would have had some sort of something in his system after getting whacked. So, Joe comes, he's like, ugh, okay, well, I'll get you like a bottle of wine. And when he comes back, he sees Cherry asleep. And then, he has the very quiet, kind of one sided conversation about how they have each other. I mentioned that a little bit ago, and that they're not alone, which is very sweet because they know they have each other. And even though like they are putting on this front around everyone else, like in the end, they know that it's the two of them.
Yeah, the fact that Cherry goes there and the minute that Joe goes into the kitchen, he falls asleep, makes me think that he couldn't rest where he was. He couldn't find solace. He couldn't sleep. Maybe, he was restless and he hadn't slept at all. And the act of sleeping in general is leaving yourself open to vulnerabilities just on a basic animalistic level. So, I think it's really important that he gets there and almost immediately falls asleep, because it makes me think like he wasn't resting, he wasn't able to find any sort of peace without being at Joe's side. And you also see Joe when they're in the hospital, there's a scene where he's talking to Longa. You don't see Cherry, but they're there because he's clearly in the hospital, but Joe is very spouse-like, like, he's changing out the flowers, he's not in his, like, uniform, he's just, like, in casual clothes, and it's very much like, "I'm taking care of the room, I'm taking care of him," but that's I think that that whole that whole scenario with the hospital and with Cherry being injured is so telling of their relationship.
Yeah, 100%. And it makes it even more important when Joe tells Longa to go after Reki, because he sees Reki and Longa's relationship as something very similar to what he and Cherry went through. Because when Joe and Cherry were teenagers, Adam looked like he was pursuing Cherry, right? Like it's very clear, like you said, they have that moment where like Adam catches him, right? And Cherry has those like big doe eyes, like, oh my gosh, Adam is so great, right? And so, like, thankfully, as far as we know, Cherry and Joe didn't lose their friendship or relationship like at all over these last few years. And then when he sees Reki and Longa start to crumble because of Adam's pursuit of Longa, Joe's like, I don't want you guys to have to deal with what we dealt with. He's like, I want to see you two succeed, so go after them, while he's there taking care of Cherry, right? And so thankfully, when Reki skated against Adam, yeah, he like hurt his head, but he didn't get whacked. He fell off his board. Whereas Cherry, it was an active act of aggression. And so if they can prevent that from happening with the younger generation, then that's what they're going to try to do.
Yeah, and going back to the teens again, when Joe and Cherry and Adam were teens, and the whole scene where Cherry has those big doe eyes, I think that alone is interesting because it's the only time we see Cherry like that. The only time we see him like wonderstruck, but that's not what I was getting at. I was thinking about Joe in that moment. Like, you see Joe in the background and he's clearly hurt. He's hurt by watching Cherry go through this, and it's almost like you can discern by just watching young Joe that he knows this is all going to end poorly, and he doesn't want to see Cherry going through this. And it's really sad because like you can just imagine like those like feelings for Cherry, and he's watching Cherry get dragged into this situation that he can't get him out of, and it's really sad. Going back to a little bit of the color theory too, I think it's really important to point out that pink and green going together, it's spring, it's blue, it's birth, it's they're colors that represent goodness and change, but good change and life. I think that that's really important too for the 2 of them.
Yeah, I think so too. I really love looking at the way that the characters are given these colors. And it's funny because with Joe, when we talked about him with the green, we felt like it really matched his character type and his personality and the way that he presents himself. Whereas Cherry alone with pink doesn't really fit it aside from his name, right? Aside from his S name and his last name, meaning pink or cherry blossoms, together with pink and green, it works.
Yeah, and, you know, cherry blossoms are connected to a tree or a stem, and what color are the leaves? They're green. So it's definitely something that goes together in that way. And, pink is a color that also represents hope.
Mhm.
And I think that that does touch on cherry a bit, but pink also is associated with not being able to see negative aspects of reality, and that's when, you get the term rose-colored glasses or rose-tinted glasses. You're looking at reality through a warped sense of, like, optimism when it shouldn't be looked at that way, and that's Cherry to a T as a teenager, looking at Adam. So I think that that is really interesting because it fits him more as a teen than it does as an adult.
Yeah, and that definitely brings us full circle to where we talked about the change he made as an adult. He saw what happened as a teenager. Thankfully he never lost his love for skateboarding all these years. He still enjoyed it. He still showed up at like he still finds joy and happiness in who he is on the track and, the sport of it all. But he went from having those rose-colored glasses, being full of hope and optimism, to someone who is way more put together, is more logical, more methodical, about the things that he does, and has found himself a job that is we see is pretty stable. If he's looking to hire an assistant, like a human assistant and not just Carla, like he's obviously well to do. Like he's doing just fine, but he definitely took the trauma of his teen years and shifted how he presents himself as an adult because of it.
And he went ahead and got himself a husband who was his best friend and can cook a mean linguine.
Yep,
Always has a glass of white wine on deck ready to go.
always. And it's funny how Cherry conducts business meetings at Cia Lalouse. Like he like you
It's so
first you
ridiculous.
see him, right? Like you see him at the restaurant with a client, and the client talks to Joe. He's like, "Oh, have you met, my associate here, blah blah blah. Like the women love him, da 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 da." And then they act like they don't know each other. And then the man turns around to take a call and they're fighting about something, and then they're like, "Totally fine, everything's great." But then they're like, "Did you see the newbie at S?" "Well, yeah, I was there, but blah blah blah." Like it's funny how they act like they don't know each other, or they don't get along. But meanwhile, like I believe that Cherry set up this meeting at the restaurant, or the client set up the restaurant and Cherry was like, "Ah, yes, good. I know exactly where that is. That sounds like a great spot to conduct business."
Yeah, it's all teasing. It's so funny because why are you pretending you don't know each other? Like, they have grown up in Okinawa too. Like, they've grown
Yeah.
up there and everybody knows they know each other and that they're together, and it's like, What are you like, what you're just bu he's just like a ball buster is what he is.
And, like, I am really excited for the OVA because we got that poster of the 2 of them in their high school uniforms, which means we're gonna get more of a taste of how they acted together as teenagers more than just, the 10-minute flashback we got in 1 episode of the series. So, it'll be really interesting to see, like, how they interacted, you know, even more than what we saw.
They're so ridiculous, and I love them, and I think it was really important in this deep dive to not only hit Cherry. Oh, I shouldn't have said it that. That's
Jenna!
I'm sorry, it was subconscious, I didn't mean to. Damon Mills, if you're watching this, I'm really sorry and I love you. It was really important not only to deep dive Cherry, but to make this also the second half of Matcha Blossom almost, like, literally talking about Matcha Blossom because, like I said, we didn't wanna super get into it with Joe because it's discussing. You have to deep dive Cherry in order to get to the fullness of Matcha Blossom.
Yeah, 100%, and we all saw what happened when we did Reki and Longa and Renga. We talked your ear off for almost an hour and a half, so
I mean, this isn't gonna be an hour long, which is pretty great, but we talked about Cherry and Matcha Blossom and Adam too, so we covered a lot of ground here today.
Yeah, I think so, and I think, there's always more to say. So if we missed anything, or if you have anything you would like to add to the discussion, please leave a comment, shoot us a message on social media, and we would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, we're never opposed to doing part 2 of deep dives. We have a lot to say, like Maddie said, we love to talk about our favorite things.
Yes, we do. So I think that's going to wrap this up. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to Mike's and Mayhem for all of the mayhem. For what was our boat name? SS Mayhemist.
The
For
SS Miss Tugboat.
so that way you don't miss any of our ramblings, our unhinged mayhem ramblings. But we have a lot to say, and we feel like they're good things to say.
Yeah, we think so, and you can also find us at Mike's and Mayhem on Instagram and TikTok.
Yes, so be sure to
Yeah.
follow us there. Yeah, give us a like and subscribe. And we will be back with more than just character deep dives. So we hope you enjoy.